What do you guys think?
Wicked. Wicked.
TSN's Motoring 96 is brought to you by Quaker State. Exceeds the highest standards for engine protection. And Midas, the way it should be.
Okay, there's a car. It's at point A and it's not moving yet. It needs to get a quarter mile down the road and it is going to be traveling 120.25
Well, as you can see, we're in the classroom this week.
Okay.
This is the math class at the Dixie Public School in Mississauga, Ontario. Now, I don't know about you, but I was never very good at math, and that kind of question I used to dread. I could never figure out why it was so important to know the answer, and I guess maybe I didn't have any teachers who could give me the answer. But this week, we're going to meet a teacher who's teaching these kids that math doesn't have to be a drag.
Drag racing is as much about math as it is speed. With the handicapping system, the car that crosses the finish line first is not always the winner.
Today we're talking about time tickets. You're going to each receive your own time ticket, either from London Racetrack or Dragway Park Cayuga. Okay? We're going to go through every number and what it means. So
When Kim Gordon is not teaching her grade 4 class, she's usually at the drag strip, crewing for her father who has been a driver most of his life. Last fall, Kim came up with the idea that drag racing could help kids learn math.
right in our curriculum at this time of the year, we're doing decimal numbers. And I know that on time tickets, there's a lot of decimal numbers. And thinking of tenths, hundreds, thousands, that's hard for a child to conceptualize. This is too small. So I think that they have a better concept of what a fraction number is or what a decimal number is. It's not a whole, and where we would use it in life. When we need to measure things really accurately, like Olympic sports, the drag racing, that there is a time that we need to go to 1,000th of a second. We need to go that detailed. And this gives them a why and a when, rather than just it's 1/1000th of a second. We can start to imagine what that means. Now pretend you're in the tower, and you have to figure out who gets a head start. Who's going to get a head start here? To be fair, because we like to play fair. Albert, who's going to get a head start? Stefan's the faster car. Should we let him go first? Who's going to get the head start? Michael, because he has the bigger number, so it's slower. I think they need to know what the bigger decimal number is, smaller decimal number, and the difference. Sometimes it's difficult to know if 11.01 is bigger or smaller than 11.10. So we work on that sort of thing, ordering numbers. And also the division of fractions, which they don't need to do now, not for a long time. But when we talked about how many lights would they get on the tree, that is dividing fraction and decimal numbers, which they're not to do yet, but they seem to understand. So when they do get to it, they'll think back, I've already divided decimal numbers. Won't be so afraid of it, they'll be exposed to it. How much of a head start is Corey going to get? Brian?
3 and a little bit.
3 lights and a little bit on the Christmas tree. Excellent. Math was really hard for me. Math was a struggle for me because I couldn't cope with anything. I didn't know why I was doing it. I needed to know why, and I'll do it. So I think when you're teaching math, you need to give the kids a reason why. Where am I going to use this? Is it important to my life? Will I have to remember this? And I think if you let them know that, they're more likely to take an interest in it. So, you know, adding numbers, averaging, estimating. When you're doing grocery shopping, you have to estimate if you have enough money with you. So I think that you have to make it real. Alex, what about your name?
12.365.
Now, which number is going to go on top for the subtraction? Alma?
Alex.
Alex's. So can you say that again, please, Alex? 12 decimal?
12.365.
Okay, do your math. How much of a head start are we getting here? 5, that looks pretty good. Okay, 4.580 head start. How many lights is that going to be? If every light is half a second, how many lights does Alex get to leave before Daniel gets to leave? Nicole?
9 lights.
9 lights. 9 lights and a little tiny bit, an 8/100th. That's just one. We're going to see a whole bunch of them. What did you think?
That one.
You like that?
Yeah. Give me a heart.
My daughter is very dedicated in what she does, and she genuinely cares about the children, and they've applied it to mathematics, they've applied it to working with decimals, different things like how weather variances affect how the cars run, and all kinds of things that they've got into, and hopefully other classes and schools will jump on board and see the learning benefits.
Well, I like it a lot, and my brother, once I start teaching him, I bet you he'll start thinking that school is really cool now. Well, it makes math more interesting. I'm talking about drag racing, and so math used to be boring, just writing numbers down on a piece of paper and making an answer. But now you have something to compare it with, like drag racing, so it actually makes it more fun.
The other angle we were getting at is that a lot of children are misled by boredom into drugs. Lack of other options, there's television and the video games. And I think at a younger age we're seeing trafficking and drug abuse, and drag racing is the ultimate high. So if we can get kids either to be spectators or participants, it gives them an interest and a focus that they don't need artificial stimulation. They can have it for themselves. A lot of high schools are getting involved in the high school challenge where they build their own race car. So I challenge high school teachers to get more involved in that, because I think that you'll see more kids focused.
Atta girl. Now all you're doing is
We're in the backwoods just outside of Gothenburg in Sweden to put Volvo's latest through its paces. A familiar face, you may say? Yes, indeed, this is the 850. However, it is the all-wheel drive derivative, a vehicle they hope will attract a lot of disenchanted SUV buyers into this vehicle. Why attract SUV buyers? Well, they're sick to death of the truck-like ride, but love the all-wheel drive capability. The 850 wagon is a fairly attractive package. The only area I'm not struck on is the rear end. It still sits too upright and a little too hearse-like for my liking. Now, while I realise it's difficult to do much if you want to preserve the practicality and interior volume, there must be some way of sprucing up the image. Power is supplied by a newly developed light-pressure turbocharged engine. The beauty of light-pressure technology is that it combines the get-up-and-go of high-pressure turbo with the fuel economy near that of a naturally aspirated engine. It also limits lag time because the turbo is smaller, lighter, and therefore spools up to speed quickly, eliminating lag, or that's the theory. In reality, you still notice a hint of lag off the line, but from about 10 kilometers an hour on, the all-wheel drive is all business. Testament to the fact is that 199 pounds-feet of the available torque is generated at just 1800 RPM. Horsepower comes in at a healthy 193. In the dash to the 100k mark, the all-wheel drive model requires just over 8.5 seconds. Now, for a family hauler with all-wheel drive ability, this is something to write home about.
Talk about a transfer case, and most people think of this monstrous piece of aluminum that gets high-centered every time you go off-road. Well, on this Volvo all-wheel drive, that's the brain box right there. Inside of here is the viscous coupling that allows them to split the power 95 through here to the front wheels, 5% to the rear when you're cruising on the highway. The beauty of the system is that under normal circumstances, like this for instance, 95% of the power is fed to the front wheels. If anything changes, the system has the ability to switch the power to 95% to the rear or anywhere in between. In a nutshell, the system works beautifully. Combine that with Volvo's electronic traction control system up front and a locking diff in back, and Old Man Winter is not to be feared. Now, these two systems only operate at low speed, meaning that they become inoperative above 40 kilometers an hour.
The only transmission available at the present time is a 5-speed manual. Now down the road we will see an automatic. As for the manual box, it's slick, offers well-chosen ratios and has a reasonably progressive clutch, all of which means that this car is easy to drive whether in town or traffic. The suspension is comprised of McPherson struts up front and a multi-link system in back. To increase ground clearance, Volvo has thrown on some beefy 205/55 tyres mounting on 16-inch aluminum rims. The result is a wagon that has a crisp, responsive feel, one more in keeping with a sports car than a family car, and yet the ride is still supple and comfortable. The front suspension geometry is designed to prevent dive under braking and lift under acceleration. It works well because during the brake test I noticed very little nosedive. The brake system itself uses discs all round as well as full anti-lock. During the brake test the system hauled this heavy wagon to a halt in just 112 feet from 80k. In short, the stopping power is as impressive as the pulling power. No question about it, these wheels are rather attractive. However, if Volvo are truly serious about the all-wheel drive go-anywhere capability, they're going to have to change them. We found a pretty major flaw. What happens, the stones get up in behind here between the wheel and the caliper, resulting in this severe grooving inside the rim, and it makes one heck of a noise whilst it's doing it. The all-wheel drive version comes with all of Volvo's usual goodies. A wonderful set of front seats, great set of analog instrumentation, very easy to use climate controls. Even the radio controls are large enough to use with gloves on. In the rear you have all the usual wagon amenities. 60/40 split folding rear seats, meaning lots of versatility. The bonus, you get a standard fold out child seat. Works wonders for anyone that's got to carry kids. When it comes to safety, few cars rival the 850. Start with Volvo's unique side impact protection system, or SIPS, which includes side airbags, and the risk of severe injury is dramatically reduced in the event of a T-bone type crash. Add to that dual airbags, front seatbelt pre-tensioners, anti-lock brakes and all-wheel drive, and things don't get much safer. I'm not quite sure what this monstrosity behind me is all about, but I do know what the 850 is all about. It brings all the usual goodies to the party, plus a very sophisticated all-wheel drive system. A system that is good enough to outdo the Quattro and almost rival that of the Porsche 911 turbos. It's time to update our long-term Saturn. Now the other day I was out with a neighbour in his 1994 SL2. Now this is a fine car with a decent twin-cam engine. Business finished, I got out of his SL2 and into our long-term SL1, the one with the base engine, single overhead cam, remember? The surprise? The new base engine offers almost as much pep and performance as the twin-cam and yet returns better fuel economy. Now that, when you consider the SL2's twin-cam is a decent engine, speaks volumes about the engine in our tester. It also speaks volumes about the advances that have been made recently in engine technology.
So, kids, what's your favorite show on TSN? I wish I was this popular when I was in school, but it's recess, and of course when I was in school I got straight A's when it came to attendance in recess. But now let's join a man I know must have been the teacher's pet when he was in school, and that's Bill Gardner back at the garage.
Well, hardly, Brad. Teacher's pet isn't quite how I describe the situation. My biggest worry was making sure I had a window seat so I could keep one eye on my motorcycle out in the parking lot. In any case, what I want to talk about this week is cooling systems, and specifically rad hoses, because I think there's probably a lot of you motorists that are driving cars that maybe you've been making short trips for quite some time back and forth to work and around the city, and you're about to embark on a holiday trip or trip down south or something like this that involves a totally different mode of operation for your vehicle. And the rad hoses are one of the things that you should closely inspect before going on such a trip, because there's a good chance that there's something waiting there to, a problem waiting to raise its ugly head. If you know what to look for and how to go about it, you may be able to actually pinpoint some of these problems yourself. Here's an example of a hose that didn't have any leaks or perforations externally. As a matter of fact, it didn't leak a drop. But if you look closely inside, you can see that it's just about ready to fail. When you take your car in for servicing, in all likelihood, the mechanic's going to use a cooling system pressure tester just like this one to simulate the stress that's normally on those rad hoses. Now the rad cap on today's cars, most of today's cars, holds around 15 or 16 psi of pressure in that cooling system when the car's up to temperature and running. But this little tester allows us to pump 15 or 16 psi into that cooling system with the engine shut off and cool so that we can analyze some of those hoses. Now in the case of this car, we've got a leak at the upper rad hose. There's a little trickle of coolant coming out, and if we move in closer, we'll actually hear it hissing out there. Now what we've done here today is simulate the pressure that your cooling system's under when the engine's running, but there's one thing we haven't simulated, and that's the heat involved in the engine compartment. A good time to check those hoses if you don't have a tester like this is immediately after you've run the car for 15 or 20 minutes. Pop that hood open and have a close look at all those hoses, because the rad pressure cap that's used on your car is going to maintain about 15 psi in that cooling system, and that's going to allow you to analyze those hoses without having to have one of these. Now, if you spot a problem with the hose, don't deal with it right now. Let the car cool down completely so that you can drain the coolant and take the cap off safely without danger of a steam burn. But if you notice a problem with those hoses, deal with it now before you have problems on the side of the road. It's a lot easier to do it at the repair shop or in your driveway than on the side of the highway. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardner for Motoring 96.
Toyota's Chief Executive Officer Hiroshi Okuda says Toyotas built in Japan are better than those built in the U.S. A recent J.D. Power study revealed that Toyota's Lexus luxury line, built entirely in Japan, had fewer defects than any other brand. However, Camrys, 80% of which are built in the States, finished behind the Oldsmobile 88 in the study.
Not the easiest thing to work on, is it?
When Graham Fletcher is not on the Motoring 96 skid pad, he's working as the editor of Car Guide magazine. Recently, he and fellow automotive journalists conducted a minivan comparison test, and Motoring tagged along.
The object of the exercise really here, we've done a couple of comparison tests in the past, and they've been extremely popular with the readers because they actually get to see how we evaluate cars and judge one against the other. With minivans being so popular, it made common sense to have our next comparison test on the minivans. And with Chrysler sort of setting the trend, the others are sort of scrambling to catch up. So this comparison test will find out if Chrysler still rule the roost, or are there other minivans that give them a serious run for their money.
One of the things I look for when I'm testing a vehicle is the competency of the brakes, stability under braking depending on the type of road surface, and then from a standing stop, acceleration and the maneuverability through the corners. The Odyssey I found a little bit noisy. The engine, was obviously having to work very hard for its living. And if any were disappointing, I think I would have to say the Previa, because it was very wallowy. It was difficult to keep the vehicle centered. It felt like a sail when you got it, caught up in the wind. So of any of them, I think that would probably be the one that I was most disappointed in.
I was surprised that out of the 6, there are maybe 3, even 4 that are awfully close in terms of quality and performance and so on. And I had a look at the prices of all those vehicles, and based on value for the money and what you get, I think that Chrysler still has a really clear lead over the rest. I'd put the Caravan in my driveway.
Well, I didn't know what to expect from the Dodge Caravan, and I was pleasantly surprised. It's, as you know, it has ruled the minivan roost for over 10 years, and I still think it is the class of the group. The Windstar comes close, so the Ford Windstar is a very good vehicle.
I think I would take the Quest. I really like the flexibility of the Quest Track seating, the ability to slide the seats without having to actually take them out. And I really liked the steering sensation of the Quest. It was by far the most confidence-inspiring of all the vehicles I've driven today.
Well, it's been an interesting day, and I think there's more than a few surprises have shown up. The first thing that really surprised me was the fact that the Windstar is a true sleeper. The engine performance and the improvements they've made to the split-port induction engine make a world of difference. The disappointments, the GM is still very much a truck. The Honda Odyssey, the engine is very noisy, and that disappointed me, and it also lacks interior volume. That aside, on the plus side, the Caravan, I think, is still ruling the roost as far as versatility goes. However, if my money were on the line, it would be the Quest in my driveway.
Our Midas tip of the week concerns fuel economy. One of the best yardsticks of how well the engine in your vehicle is tuned is the fuel economy that vehicle delivers. It's going to vary according to the time of year and the driving conditions, but if you keep a logbook and record each tank of fuel, you'll have a pretty good idea of how well tuned that engine is just by reading the fuel mileage. How do you go about doing it? Well, obviously, if you have a trip meter, it's pretty simple. Just count the number of miles, reset the trip meter to 0 each time you fuel up, and divide by the number of liters you've used to find out your fuel economy. Keep a logbook on it and mark down some comments beside it as to what the typical trips on that tank of gas entailed. Was it city driving, stop and go, or was it a straight run on the highway? What were the weather conditions like? These are all factors in fuel economy. Keep a logbook. If you all of a sudden see that fuel economy out of sync by more than 10%, you better start thinking about a tune-up. That's your Midas tip of the week.
Can you recall how long you've owned your used car? Back in a moment on Kenzie's Corner.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
I wonder if the owner of this handsome Bronco got a recall notice recently. Well, if he isn't, he's one of the few Ford owners that hasn't got such a notice. Over 23 million Ford cars, light trucks, and vans were recalled recently, the largest recall in automotive history. The problem apparently is an ignition switch that can cause the vehicle to spontaneously combust. And for those of you who don't read a lot, that means catch on fire. Now, should you worry about something like this? I mean, after all, recalls are triggered on the basis of a very low percentage of vehicles with the problem. Well, in Canada, you should care because the prevalence is higher in Canada on a proportional basis, something to do with cold weather making the problem more severe. Now, we're not just picking on Ford here, because every car company has recall problems. But in this particular case, some of the vehicles go back to the mid-'80s, quite a long time ago, and some of these vehicles are now owned by the third and fourth, maybe fifth owner. Oftentimes, the ownership trail is broken. The car company doesn't even know who owns their vehicle. Word of warning then, if you're buying a used car, make sure your car company knows that you're now the registered owner, so if a recall does come, you can be notified. And if you do get the recall notice, for crying out loud, take the vehicle to the dealer and get the repairs done. It's not going to cost you anything. And think about what would happen if you did get the recall notice, you ignored it, and then your vehicle caught on fire. You go to your insurance company, what are they going to tell you? Well, if I was your insurance company, I'd say, hey buddy, next time buy a fire extinguisher, you're on your own, get out of my office. Do that recall. I'm Jim Kenzie.
Well, unfortunately, recess is over, and so is this week's edition of Motoring 96. Before we go, we want to congratulate Kim Gordon on her efforts in the classroom. You know, whether you're into drag racing or not, it's great to see teachers being innovative. I mean, it's only these kids that can benefit. And isn't that what it's all about? That's it for now. We'll see you next week for more stories about cars and the people who drive them.
In the old days, telephones, that was it. You know, we'd say, okay, you got to call us in the morning before 10 o'clock. You know, let us know where you are if you're on schedule, because our customer's going to be calling. And normally what happened, they would call. But at the same time, the guy that didn't call is the same guy that you wanted.
Basically, we can see at this point, green sort of means that they're empty, reds that they're waiting for loads, and the blue means they're all on the move.
TSN's Motoring 96 has been brought to you by Quaker State. Exceeds the highest standards for engine protection. And Midas, the way it should be.